No, I do not think people that create gory, over-the-top horror films are bad people or need their minds questioned. Art the Clown might be killing a kid in Terrifier 3, and mainstream audiences are up in arms with this controversy. People are arguing that it's crossing a line because it involves kids. But no, horror is all about pushing boundaries, seeing things that make you uncomfortable. It's also about the special effects. The Terrifier films are really big on practical effects, and they're super impressive to look at. And it's all fake. One of the reasons why people psychologically and scientifically like horror so much is because it activates different things in your brain that make you feel the adrenaline, the dopamine rush. It's not because you want it to happen. It's not because the director actually wants something like that to happen in real life. It's just about pushing the bounds of what's scary or what's too much or what's not enough. And I think it's funny that people like to act like the kids in horror movies thing is really new, because it's really not. And a lot of kids really enjoy horror films. Despite the very graphic scene with Georgie in It 2017, children love the It franchise. I saw so many children dressed up as Art the Clown at Monsterpalooza this year, and all of the child actors on the sets of these horror films are treated super well with extra precautions in place to make sure that they're comfortable. Look at the kid who plays Carlos on the set of Saw X. If the kids in the films are having a good time, and the kids who enjoy watching horror movies are having a good time, and then the people involved are just doing things that are fake, then why do you care?
This woman committed such a heinous crime that the people of Aberdeen were demanding her blood. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Helen Priestley. 8-year-old Helen lived on a first-floor flat in this block of flats in Aberdeen with her parents, Agnes and John. She was described as a quiet but confident young girl, however not everybody had glowing opinions on her. The neighbours who lived below them, the Donald family, did not get along with the Priestleys. The two mothers, Agnes Priestley and Jeannie Donald, had a massive falling out years before, and they never made up after it. They had been falling out for so long that neither of them could even remember why they had fallen out in the first place. It was said that Helen would torment the Donald family. She would kick their door in when she was passing it to go upstairs to her flat. She would shake the banister to cause a racket, and she supposedly relentlessly bullied Jeannie's daughter. So this, along with much more, made Jeannie really resent Helen, and she would be nasty to her. She would shout at her, scowl at her, and sometimes even chase her. On the 20th of April 1934, Agnes sent Helen along to the bakery to pick up a loaf of bread at around 1:30 p.m. As time was starting to pass, Agnes was noticing that Helen wasn't back home when she should be. She shouldn't have been taken this long, so she set out trying to find Helen, going to the bakery first. The baker confirmed that Helen had been, and she had bought a loaf of bread, so Agnes made her way back up the flat, and when she found that Helen wasn't there, she started to worry. After some time had passed and Helen still wasn't home, overcome with fear, Agnes contacted the police and reported her daughter missing. This began one of the biggest searches in Aberdeen's history. Hundreds of volunteers aided in trying to help find Helen. They searched everywhere. They searched back gardens, abandoned building, all the alleyways, every single nook and cranny. They left no stone unturned, but Helen was nowhere to be found. The search went on all through the night despite the torrential rain. At around 2 a.m, after much persuasion, John, who was Helen's dad, made his way back to the flat with a friend named Alex. This is Alex, who was an upstairs neighbour to the Priestleys. John was exhausted. He had been at the forefront of the searches, desperately trying to find his daughter for hours upon end. Alex convinced him that in his exhausted state, he might not be as thorough in his search of Helen than he would be if he was energised. Alex assured John that they would go home, just have a couple of hours rest, get some energy back, and then they'd be both back up out searching. 5 a.m. eventually came round, and Alex had left his flat, which was above the Priestleys, and tried to creep downstairs past the Priestleys' flat. He knew that John needed the extra rest, so being the good friend that he was, he kept his promise on getting a couple of hours rest and then going back out to rejoin the search. So as he's creeping down the stairs, he notices something on the ground floor that's out of place. There was a big bright blue bag that wasn't there when he and John had came in the flat at 2 a.m. He knelt down on the floor and unzipped the bag, discovering the body of 8-year-old Helen. It was found that Helen had been strangled to death, mutilated and raped. From inside the bag, investigators were able to extract foreign hairs that didn't belong to Helen. They noticed on the blue bag there was like a faded Canadian export stamp. It was found that these bags would be used to deliver flour, which led the investigators back to that bakery. When questioned, the baker admitted that yes, this bag had belonged to him and he had many of these bags. However, a woman had recently come in asking if she could borrow some, so he gave some to her. He didn't know this woman's name and he just gave police a very vague description of her. Something else that was interesting about the bag was that both the outside and the inside were bone dry. Now, as I mentioned, on the night of this search, it was pouring down with rain, so it would have been impossible for someone to walk through the streets with this bag without getting it wet, but also without being seen by the hundreds of people that are searching the streets for Helen. Police began to do door-to-door inquiries, beginning with everyone who lived in the flats. Everyone in the flats commented on Jeannie and her dislike of Helen and the fact that the Donald family were one of the only people who didn't participate in searching for Helen, and how it was a coincidence that this bag was found on the ground floor, the same floor that the Donald family lived on. Police questioned both Jeannie and her husband Alexander. I couldn't find exactly what prompted their arrest, but both of them were arrested. Alexander was quite quickly let go after many witnesses said that they had seen him in work in a barber shop the whole day that Helen had went missing, so that only left Jeannie. The public, who were given all of the details regarding Helen's murder, could not understand how a woman could inflict such a horrific death and sadistic injuries on an 8-year-old girl. They were absolutely outraged, and when they heard that Jeannie was getting arrested, they all kind of gathered around the flat ready to lynch her when she came out. Alexander and their daughter were actually forced to move out of Aberdeen because of the harassment and the death threats that they were constantly receiving. Jeannie's trial began on the 16th of July 1934 at Edinburgh Crown Court, where she pled not guilty. The prosecution had mountains of evidence against her though, including witnesses who had heard screaming coming from the direction of her flat. A professor from Glasgow University had compared the hairs that were found in the bag that Helen was found in to hairs from a brush that Jeannie had used in prison, and he determined that they were a perfect match. And much more, they actually had over 160 witnesses. Her defence was that it was shown that Helen had been raped, and apparently a woman couldn't do that. However, it was deemed that the injuries that Helen had sustained, which made it appear that she had been raped, were actually from household items. The jury deliberated for a very small 18 minutes before coming back with their verdict. 38-year-old Jeannie Donald was found guilty of the murder of 8-year-old Helen Priestley. This was one of the first times that forensic had aided in convicting someone, because forensics was still so new back then. Jeannie would go on to be sentenced to death, however an appeal saw this reduced to life imprisonment. Throughout her times behind bars, she was described as a model prisoner who was very warm, friendly, and considered a mother figure. In 1944, 10 years after Helen's murder, Jeannie's husband was diagnosed with cancer and was really poorly. Due to her good behaviour, she was granted compassionate leave so that she could leave the prison to care for her dying husband. After he passed, she was actually allowed to stay out, much to the disappointment of Helen's family and the general public. Jeannie died at 81 years old in 1976, never saying why she murdered Helen and never ever admitting it either.
This man is the IRL Toji Fushiguro. Giga Akutami just confirmed in the JJK exhibition that Toji is modeled after Jason Statham. Jason Statham is a very well-known actor and martial artist, and this dude is built like an absolute beast. He literally has the Toji back. No. He's got his own back because Toji's based off of him. He's been in The Beekeeper, The Transporter, The Meg, Wrath of the Man, The Expendables, and the list just goes on. He's been in dozens and dozens of movies. We already got people creating fan arts of him with the Toji layover over his body. Now, it's crazy to think about because at this point, every time somebody says, oh no, I want the Toji build, I want to look like Toji. Nah, you actually don't want to look like Toji. You want to look like Jason Statham because Toji is based off of Jason Statham. But this is a really interesting fact. I'm glad that we actually got confirmation of who he was based off of, because I didn't even know that Toji was based off anybody. I don't think any of us figured that. But Giga Akutami confirmed this himself, so there's really no arguing with it. Yeah, that's crazy.
Demons are real, at least according to Reddit user Sunshine Pumpkin. She was walking up and down the center aisles at her grocery store when all of a sudden she saw a man who was standing in the middle of the aisle. At first glance, There was nothing wrong with the man. That was, until he turned around and looked at her. When he turned around and looked at her, his eyes were solid black. Not just the pupils, but even the whites of his eyes. Reddit user Sunshine Pumpkin then says that she felt immense fear. She felt terrified. She says that she was so scared that she literally ran all the way to the checkout lines, checked out, and ran to her car in the parking lot. Says that she's never felt that feeling of dread that she felt that day in the grocery store. Fear that was put into her just by looking into this man's eyes. She says she's 45, and she's never experienced fear like that. So what do you guys think? Was this a real demonic encounter? Was it a trick of the light? Let me know in the comments down below.
So Art the Clown is going to be killing a kid in Terrifier 3, most likely, but why is that so controversial? Why is everybody talking about it? First of all, Terrifier is very famous for its over-the-top level of gore, but still being allowed to be inside of a movie theater. They literally worked on the infamous bedroom scene in Terrifier 2 for 3 years because of COVID delays, and it was literally making people vomit and or walk out of the theater. And we've been told that one of the scenes in Terrifier 3 is so over the top that the actor who plays Art the Clown nearly vomited on set while they were filming. But I think the reason why his target being a kid is so controversial is because this isn't something we see in the horror genre that often, at least in mainstream horror movies. Do you guys remember the media outcry when Georgie was unalived in It 2017? There was so much talk about how graphic and new this was to the genre, which in reality it wasn't that new, but it was very new for mainstream audiences to be able to see something like that at the movie theater. And I think that's another reason why in Halloween 2018 we have that tease with Michael Myers maybe about to unalive a newborn. Because there's that scene where Michael Myers walks up to the crib and he stands over it menacingly, but he doesn't do anything. He walks away. Art the Clown is interesting because Art the Clown used to be a little indie darling, and in a way he still is, but now he's becoming more mainstream. He's becoming more of a household name. So seeing your household slashers doing something crazy like that, I think is a little unprecedented.
I saw this post that said, I hate when mangakas try so hard to make an iconic panel, no need for kids to be carrying all that, just forced. And the manga this person's talking about is called The Horizon. It's actually a webtoon and it's actually really good. But his argument is that since they are children and they're holding weapons, that makes this a forced iconic manga panel. And this is obviously a bait post. Like, we gotta realize this. Bro said I've never even read it. Like, come on now. I don't think there's anything wrong with forcing a manga panel to be iconic, because genuinely, what's wrong with a mangaka building up to a certain point in the story that's been having a lot of build up behind it, and them in their head actually putting a lot of detail into these certain panels? What's wrong with trying to force a panel to be iconic? Part of the thing that makes an iconic panel is what the fan base deems it as iconic, because if something becomes iconic, it's going to be talked about in the large masses. For example, when the mangaka of The Horizon made this panel, I don't think he was genuinely thinking in his head, I want to make this an iconic panel, even though it is, and even if he was thinking that, what's the problem with it? Like, come on now, it's just hating to hate.
Hi, I'm Cam, and this is Olympian True Crimes Part 1, Trevor Jacob. Trevor is an accomplished athlete and stuntman from California. At the 2014 Olympics, he placed 9th in the snowboard cross. He started posting his crazy stunts on YouTube, mostly about snowboarding and skydiving, and by 2021, his channel had around 100,000 subscribers. After getting a sponsorship deal, he wanted to make sure his next video went viral, so he spent months planning it. And although it would be a successful video, it would also land him in prison. And finally, on November 24th, 2021, Trevor took off from the Lompoc City Airport in a 1940 vintage plane. Sources say the plane was in desperate need of repairs. Trevor brought a selfie stick and mounted cameras to capture every angle. He was also wearing a parachute, which is extremely odd because no one gets into a plane expecting it to crash. At the beginning of the video, Trevor shows off his friend's ashes, which he planned to scatter over the mountains. But 35 minutes after takeoff, the engine cuts off and the plane stalls mid-air, and the pilot side door is cracked open before that even happens. Eventually, Trevor jumps out of the plane and we see it crash into the mountains below, and fortunately no one was hiking right there. Trevor claims he had to hike several miles before eventually flagging down a driver. He didn't report the crash until 2 days had passed, and lied to federal investigators claiming he didn't know where the plane was wrecked, even though his video literally shows him hiking to it to retrieve the camera footage. So a couple weeks later, Trevor and a friend flew a helicopter to the site and transported the wrecked plane back to the airport, where he then cut it up and threw it away so the feds couldn't find it. On top of all of these clearly bad decisions, Trevor made the decision to post the video online, and basically everyone knew immediately that he had faked this. In May of 2023, Trevor pled guilty to 1 count of destruction and concealment, with the intent to obstruct a federal investigation. A judge sentenced him to 6 months in prison, but he was released on June 12th of this year after serving a little over 4 months.
Tim Burton had a bunch of 5-year-olds rooting for a guy to kill himself, and I think it's finally time that we talk about that. Victor is given a choice. He can either drink poison and marry Emily, the corpse bride, or he can go off with his real bride to be Victoria, who is alive. But there's just one problem, especially for the kids watching. Living with the dead is just objectively better than being in the land of the living in this universe. In the land of the dead, everyone's having a wonderful time. It's stress-free because you're already there. Everybody's partying. And you can also reconnect with your old loved ones who have passed on with no consequences. But then in the land of the living, everyone is so uptight and miserable all the time. And Victor doesn't even know his real living fiance all that much. It's an arranged marriage for money. And then you have Emily, the character who has the way cooler design, the way more interesting backstory, and she's incredibly sweet to everyone. And the message of the movie is definitely supposed to be like, no, make your own path, make your own decisions, set yourself free, etc. But I really think a lot of kids watching this took the message of, no, he should have been with Emily because she's just the more fun option, and the land of the dead is a way sicker place to be than the land of the living in this universe. And I think that's why, nearly 20 years later, there's this problem whenever you have Corpse Bride merch, it always has to be Victor and Emily because that's what the people wanted. That's what you wanted to happen while you were watching this.
This is the moment this cop gets caught stealing money from a man who was being arrested. On March 14th, this police officer named Henry Chapman assisted in pulling over Moncray Moon for a speeding ticket, which then later led to an arrest because he had an outstanding warrant. Moments after, the officer was instructed to search the man's car and he withheld a total of $8,000, which he was supposed to give back later. So then Moncray called his brother to come pick up his possessions, and there he is. But when he arrived, the officer only gave him his phone, but still wanted to hold on to his money. When they arrived to the police station, Moncray noticed that the police officer was stashing some of his cash in between his legs, and he called it out right away.
Look, he's moving. He's moving between his legs.
Stand right here.
I'm gonna stand right here, but can y'all please check y'all fellow officer? Please. What's going on? Look, he's moving his arm right now.
How much time?
At first, the other officers did not believe what he was saying, but they said, you know what, let's just search the car so that he can see that he's not stealing any of his money. And that's when they found $900 tucked into the driver's side door.
Come here. Come, yeah, come here. I'm telling you.
I want you
to come here.
You know that.
Okay. Do you see anything?
No, yeah, look, no cap. I'm not even gonna touch it. It's blue hundreds right here. It's all the blue hundreds are right there behind that receipt. Thank you. All that's my money. He didn't have that.
This is your money?
Yes, I heard him crumble it up. Thank you. Thank you. All that ain't my money. Right? That's my money. That's my money right here.
Sir, you've been watching me the whole time.
I seen you take it. I seen you crumble it up. Just count it.
Not
if
me.
I'm right, it's gonna be around $1,000. If I'm right, and like I told you, I just went to Wendy's. I seen you steal.
No, sir.
If you don't mind,
And then what's so weird about this is that the officer was allowed to resign instead of being fired. He was then taken into custody and charged with 1 count of embezzlement. But people are furious that he was given a slap on the wrist, considering the fact that he committed robbery while in possession of a weapon, which in most cases someone would be charged with armed robbery. And after watching this, I thought to myself, this probably isn't the first time that this cop has done something like this, especially since he's doing it right in front of everyone with zero fear of consequences.
This man was building his snowman with his daughter when he was murdered at random. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is 1 Minute Murder. On the morning of the 29th of December 2005, 30-year-old Irishman Fergus Murray was outside his home on Blundell Avenue in Grimsby. He and his 2-year-old daughter were taking advantage of the white fluffy snow that had fallen, getting straight out into it and beginning to build a snowman. When out of nowhere, a madman approached them, shooting Fergus in the legs. This man was 29-year-old Guy Tasker. Guy had been getting a bit of jip from his friends and he wanted to prove that he was the big man. He had obtained a weapon and sought out to intimidate someone to make himself feel better so he could feel hard when he came across Fergus and his 2-year-old daughter. Guy was in an irritable mood, both drunk and high, when he approached Fergus, shooting him twice, which would eventually kill him. At his Hull Crown Court trial, Guy tried to claim that he wasn't the killer, that someone else had committed the murder, but the jury didn't believe him. He would be found guilty of murder and handed a life sentence with a minimum of 28 years to serve.
The details of the axe murders of Villisca read like a terrifying horror film. The scariest part is, it's real. It was June 1912 in Villisca, Iowa. The Moore family were very popular and well respected in the local area. The parents, Sarah and Josiah, had 4 children. Herman was 11, Mary was 10, Arthur was 7, and Paul was 5. On the evening of the 9th of June, the family actually had 2 other children round as guests. These were Ina and Lena Stillinger, aged 8 and 12. They were a religious family and had all been to church that evening and came home at around 10 p.m. Now, the household usually ran like clockwork, and the neighbours would regularly see the parents out in the morning undertaking their daily routine. However, at 7 a.m. the following day, their neighbour, Mary, noticed that something was up. No one had come outside to let the chickens out. Now, she went and knocked on the door expecting that maybe they'd just overslept, but nobody answered. She also couldn't get inside because the door was locked. Mary decided to call Josiah's brother. He went round with his spare key and had an absolutely hideous shock. In the guest room, Ina and Lena lay deceased on the bed. He immediately called the local policeman. The policeman then discovered more bodies. The whole family and guests had been slaughtered in their house. They were bludgeoned to death with an axe. Now, interestingly, the dad, Josiah, had more injuries than anybody else. Now, did this suggest a motive for the murder? Strangely, the clues at the crime scene indicated that the killer or killers had actually killed the adults, then gone and killed the children, and then returned to the adults' bedroom to inflict more injuries. Now, due to this crime taking place such a long time ago, the investigation was not up to modern standards. The crime scene was completely contaminated early on, and the forensics were nowhere near as advanced. Evidence actually showed that the only person that was likely to be awake during the attack was Lena. She was the only one who had a defensive wound. So let's take a look at some suspects in this case. Now, there was a man named Andy Sawyer. Now, he was reported to the police by his boss for just acting really suspiciously. He was really obsessed with the murders and actually went to sleep at night after the murders, clutching an axe. However, he did have an alibi as to what he was doing on the night of the murders. Funnily enough, he was arrested in a different area while the murders were taking place. Then there was Frank Jones, a man that Josiah knew through work. There was speculation that potentially a business deal had gone sour, or that the murder could be related to Josiah having an affair with his daughter. There is no proof for either theory. There was also a man named William Mansfield, who some people suspected had been hired by Frank to commit the murders on his behalf. He was also suspected to be responsible for the murders of his wife and child. However, he did actually have an alibi for the night of the axe murders, and he actually sued one of the detectives for over $2,000, which at the time was loads of money. There was also a man named Henry Lee Moore, and in May 1913, an investigator claimed to have solved the axe murders. He said it was Henry Moore. Now, Henry Moore was a convicted killer who had killed his own mum and nan just months after the Moore family murders. The investigator was convinced that Henry was to blame, but he was never charged. Lastly, there was Reverend George Kelly, who was a travelling minister. He was arrested in 1917 for strangely hounding police about the murders. He used to send letters to the police about the murders and also to the Moore family's relatives. He'd previously been detained in a mental health hospital in Washington. Some theorized that he was involved due to mental health issues. He actually did admit to the axe murders eventually, but then withdrew his confession. He was tried twice, and his first trial ended in a hung jury. In his second, he was acquitted. Chillingly, these axe murders remain unsolved to this day. Whoever brutally murdered 8 people may have been free to kill again. You can actually do a tour around this murder house, which is definitely on my bucket list.
This priest tied himself to 1,000 colorful helium balloons and then was found in the ocean months later. On April 20th, 2008, 41-year-old Father Adiller DeCarli wanted to raise money to build a chapel in his hometown, so he chose to tie himself up to 1,000 helium balloons and float over the ocean. He also hoped to break the previous 19-hour record, but unfortunately, things ended tragically. On the morning of April 20th, Father Adiller was fully prepared to take take off, and for safety reasons, he put on a helmet, waterproof coveralls, and an aluminum thermal flight suit, as well as a GPS tracker and a radio to communicate with people on the ground. Only a few hours after taking off, despite the radio and GPS tracker, Father Adiller disappeared and could not be located. The last thing that he said through the radio was that he was losing height and was going to land in the ocean. Search and rescue teams were immediately dispatched, and after 2 days, they found the colorful balloons in the sea off Brazil's southeast coast, but Father Adiller was not there. Then, a few months later, a body was found in the ocean, which turned out to be him. It was reported that the priest had reached an altitude of 20,000 feet and then was blown off course by the strong winds, causing his tragic death.
So between giant spiders, Mick Taylor, and kangaroos that can kick my ass, I didn't think I had any more reasons not to visit Australia. But then I watched this movie, and now I'm afraid of sharks in supermarkets. I'm Mia Van Gool, your horror movie hype man. Hit that follow button, and today, we're talking about bait. A freak tsunami trapped shoppers at a coastal Australian supermarket inside the building, along with 12-foot great white sharks. So I didn't plan a Sharni Vincent double feature, but here we are, and I'm not complaining. This movie is a perfect combination of campy and intense, and I absolutely loved it. There's a few recognizable faces, some gnarly makeup and effects, some super cheesy CGI, and a surprising amount of blood and gore, which I, of course, was absolutely stoked about. This is my new favorite fun shark movie, and I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. You can watch it right now on Prime Video and Tubi. If you've seen Bait, then let me know what you think of it in the comments. But thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
This man committed a hideous massacre because he couldn't get a girlfriend. He's been nicknamed the Incel Killer. Elliot Rodger was the son of British filmmaker Peter Rodger, who worked on the Hunger Games. His family moved to LA in 1996 for work. Elliot's parents divorced just a year later. Elliot wasn't happy when his dad remarried. He really resented being told what to do by a woman that wasn't his mum. As Elliot grew up and tried and failed to get a girlfriend, his resentment towards women just grew. He would keep journals of his thoughts and once wrote, "This was an all-boys school. How in the hell were those boys even able to meet girls to have S with? I hoped they were lying." He also talked about one of his classmates bragging about being intimate with his partner. He heard the classmate play a voice recording of the pair together, and he wrote, "He grinned at me smugly. I felt so inferior to him and I hated him." Now, he moved schools due to bullying, but again struggled to make connections with male friends or female love interests. Following his graduation, his parents enrolled him at Santa Barbara City College and paid for an apartment for him. Despite this, he was still angry at the world and failed to attract females. He was known to even throw drinks at women who wouldn't smile at him. In July 2013, a very disturbing incident occurred when Elliot attended a house party. Again, getting no female attention, he actually climbed onto a ledge. He pretended he had a weapon and pretended to start to shoot people. He then tried to push some women over the ledge, but some men decided to push him off instead. He ended up with a broken ankle, and he lied to police and said that the attack was unprovoked. In the following months, he planned a massacre. He started uploading YouTube videos ranting about women not giving him any attention. He posted a total of 22 videos before carrying out a hideous attack. On the 23rd of May 2014, Elliot stabbed his 2 roommates and friend in a frenzied attack. He stabbed them in their apartment over 134 times. He then callously got changed, went to Starbucks and ordered a vanilla latte like nothing was wrong. The victims lay deceased and Elliot returned to his apartment. He then wrote a chilling final diary entry before going off to commit more murders. He emailed several people about why he was doing what he was about to do. He then uploaded a final YouTube vlog in which he said, "You girls have never been attracted to me. I will punish you all for it." At around 9:15 p.m. that day, he travelled to the Alpha Pi sorority house. Now, he knew that this sorority house housed loads of really good-looking girls who he was very resentful to. He knocked, but no one answered, so he was frustrated but left. He decided to make his way around Isla Vista, shooting people randomly. He killed 22-year-old Catherine Cooper and 19-year-old Veronica Weiss. He then went on to shoot multiple other people, causing loads of injuries. In less than 8 minutes, he had shot and injured 14 people. He then killed 20-year-old Christopher Michaels Martinez. News spread that a gunman was on the loose, and armed police tracked him down. Elliot began firing at police, at which point they fired back at him. He He ended up shooting himself and taking his own life in front of them. In total, he murdered 6 innocent victims and injured numerous others, not to mention the trauma that he left witnesses with. At the end of the emails that he'd sent to people, he wrote, "Finally, at long last, I can show the world my true worth."
Fascinating facts that you didn't know. The Nile crocodile is estimated to kill hundreds of people each year, which is more than all other crocodilian species combined. There's a Pokemon card with the move Birthday Surprise, a move that would deal more damage if it was your birthday, that was banned from competitive play in order to stop people from faking the date of their birth to cheat. There's a legally blind man who had his eye lenses removed and since then was able to see celestial objects normally invisible to the naked eye. His name is Tim Doucette, and he has his own observatory in Nova Scotia. It's harder to get into Clown College than it is Harvard. Clown colleges require an extensive personality profile needed to be submitted to give the school's directors a clear understanding of the prospective student's psychology and motivation, among other stringent requirements.
Sharni Vincent plays my favorite final girl of all time. Aaron, and you're next. But did you know that she starred in another home invasion with a twist horror movie in 2016? Because I didn't. Until now. I'm Ian Van Gogh, your horror movie hype man. Hit that follow button, and today, we're talking about House on Willow Street. After a young woman is kidnapped, her captors soon realize that they are the ones in danger. So this independent horror spans numerous subgenres. It starts off strong with a home invasion, has some gnarly makeup effects and a few decent jump scares. It gets into possessions and the paranormal, and it still kept my attention. It wasn't until the third act where it started to lose me a bit with some typical tropes and some questionable CGI, but I still enjoyed it overall. It feels a lot like a lower budget Abigail meets The Exorcist with some demons and hauntings thrown in. Overall, it's not the best movie out there, but it's definitely entertaining and has some pretty cool scenes. It's also Sharni Vincent's final feature film role, at least as of right now. If you want to check it out for yourself, it's currently streaming on AMC+. If you've seen House on Willow Street, then let me know what you think of it in the comments. But thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Studio Bones cooked. This My Hero Academia episode was better than the manga. Compared to some of the pivotal moments that we got in the season prior, which were absolutely laughable, there were many pivotal moments this episode that were done much better than the manga. For example, the top panel, the bottom I would give to the manga. I'd say the manga and anime on this one were pretty even. Once again, I would give anime on both of these. It was done beautifully. I'd say manga on top. On the bottom, I'd give it to the anime, to be honest. But this is just to show you how many great moments there were in this episode. The impact frames, the soundtracks, the animation, the art, the direction, the voice acting, everything was just absolutely 10 out of 10. This is up to debate for being probably the best episode of My Hero Academia. If not, definitely emotional-wise. And many people seem to agree, saying that it's much worse animated. Not in a bad way. When they say much worse animated, they mean like much worse as in scary-like. Bro, Bakugo looks so pale in this shot. They did it better than the manga. Bones cooked. Yeah, they're back on the map.